I woke up after my eye surgery, but I couldn't see anything. I heard the door open, and then my much younger wife's voice came from beside my hospital bed. Finally, the smelly old man won't be able to see a thing anymore. My son let out a quiet laugh. So when do we move forward with the plan? I lay completely still, forcing my breathing to remain slow and steady. Then the woman leaned closer and whispered something that made my blood run cold. At that moment, I realized my surgery had never been an accident. I am grateful you chose to spend your time here truly. Now tell me something. Where in the world are you right now? Drop your city, your country, anything. Let's see how far this story has traveled. Heads up, some elements in this story are fictional, shaped for storytelling and learning. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson inside that one is all yours to keep. The last thing I remembered before they put me under was the smell of antiseptic so sharp it burned the back of my throat, and a young nurse with a calm voice telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7. Then the world went dark, not the soft dark of sleep, but the hard, total dark of a switch being thrown in a room with no windows. What I did not expect was that when the world came back, it would be darker still. I came back slowly, the way you surface from deep water. First there was sound, a low electronic hum, something rhythmic and mechanical, a beeping that matched the pulse I could feel in my temples. Then there was the smell again, antiseptic and recycled air, the specific climate-controlled stillness that exists nowhere on Earth, except in places where people are being kept alive by machines. Then there was the weight of something across my face. Gauze. Bandaging. Both eyes wrapped tight. I was in the recovery room at Mercy Ridge. I was 69 years old. I had just come out of a 4-hour surgery to repair the degenerative damage in my retinas that had been stealing my vision for 3 years. The surgeon, Dr. Harlow Peck, had told me the procedure had a 90% success rate. He had told me this with the particular confidence of a man who had performed it dozens of times. I lay still. That was the first decision I made when I came back to myself: lie still, say nothing, and listen. It was not a plan. It was instinct. 38 years of negotiating contracts across a table from men who wanted what I had built had given me one reflex above all others. When you do not yet know what room you are walking into, you do not announce yourself at the door. The room was quiet. The machines beeped. The air conditioning cycled. Then the door opened. 2 sets of footsteps. I had spent enough years paying attention to people to know them by the way they moved. The first set was Serena's, the measured click of her heels, the pace of someone who never entered a room without knowing exactly what expression she intended to wear when she got there. The second was Preston's flat-footed, slightly too fast, the walk of a man whose thoughts were always a step ahead of where his body had decided to be. The door closed behind them. Serena moved to the side of the bed. I felt the shift in air pressure as she leaned toward the monitors. Her perfume reached me before her voice did the French one she wore every day, the one I had bought her for our first anniversary 18 months ago. Then she spoke. One word, soft enough that if I had still been half submerged in anesthesia, I would have missed it completely. Finally, my heart rate did not change. I made sure of it. I focused on my breathing slow, even the rhythm of a man still unconscious, and I cataloged that single word with the same precision I had used for 3 decades when sitting across from someone who had just told me without meaning to exactly what they wanted. Finally. Not thank God he made it. Not is he okay. Finally. Serena turned slightly. I heard the rustle of fabric as she angled toward Preston. And when she spoke again, her voice had the particular quality of someone who has decided that the person in the bed is furniture. The doctor said it this morning, she said. Before you got here. The nerve damage is permanent. Both eyes. She let that land for a moment. He won't be reading anything on his own again. Preston made a sound, half laugh, half exhale. So he can't check what he's signing. Not without us telling him what it is. How long do we have? 2 weeks, Serena said. Maybe 3. We need him weak enough to cooperate without asking the right questions. The medication schedule Marsh outlined will handle most of that. By the time Gideon brings the transfer paperwork, Clifton will sign whatever we put in front of him and remember almost none of it by morning. I lay completely still. My hands were flat against the mattress. The IV line in my right arm pulled slightly when I breathed, and I used that small sensation as an anchor, something physical to hold, while the rest of me processed what I was hearing with the cold, systematic focus of a man who has survived long enough to know that panic is a luxury, and clarity is the only currency that matters. Transfer paperwork. Gideon, that had to be Gideon Marsh, the estate attorney, whose name I had seen copied on one correspondence months ago, without understanding why my wife's signature appeared on the distribution list. Medication schedule. 2 to 3 weeks. They had been planning this before I went into surgery. Preston stepped closer to the bed. I could feel him standing over me the way you can feel a shadow even when you cannot see the light it is blocking. "Look at him," he said, and his voice had dropped all pretense of being anyone's son. 69 years old. Can't open his eyes. Can't see his own hand in front of his face. He made that sound again. All that empire building, and it comes down to this. Serena's heels clicked as she moved to stand beside him. "He built it," she said with the tone of someone making a minor concession. "We'll manage it better." I breathed in, I breathed out. Preston leaned down. I felt his breath near my ear, warm and too close, and when he spoke, it was no longer a murmur to Serena across the room. It was directed at me, at the man he believed could not receive it. "The old man can't see anything now," he said. "We don't need to be careful anymore. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign what we tell you to sign, and then we're going to move you somewhere quiet. A facility, nothing fancy, but clean enough that nobody asks uncomfortable questions. And you're going to spend whatever time you've got left in a room that doesn't cost us what this room costs." He straightened up. "That's the plan. Don't make it complicated." Serena put her hand on Preston's arm, not a gesture of comfort, a signal to stop. "Not now," she said quietly. "We need him calm. Marsh needs him calm." "He can't hear me." "We don't know that yet." A pause, then Preston stepped back. I had been in this industry long enough to walk into a building, look at the foundation, and know before the structural report came in whether the thing would hold. I had been wrong twice in my career. Both times I had ignored what I already knew because I wanted the project to work. I was not going to make that mistake again. They stayed for 11 more minutes. I counted. Serena straightened the sheet at the foot of the bed, a domestic gesture so practiced it turned my stomach. Preston checked his phone twice, the screen tap sound unmistakable. When they left, the door closed with the soft click of people who had convinced themselves that the hard part was almost done. I lay in the dark for 20 minutes after the sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway. Then I started counting something else. Not time, not minutes until someone came back. I started counting what I knew, what I did not know, and what I needed to find out before Gideon Marsh arrived with his paperwork and his medication schedule and his plan to walk out of this hospital with everything I had spent my life building. The surgery had a 90% success rate. Peck had told me that himself across a desk, with the confidence of a man who had done this 100 times. I had woken up blind. Somewhere between that 90% and this darkness, something had gone wrong. And I did not believe, not for 1 second, that it had been an accident. They left at what I estimated was mid-morning, based on the shift in foot traffic outside my door. The hallway outside went from the quiet of early recovery ward hours to the slightly busier rhythm of a hospital working through its first rounds of the day. I started to map the patterns, how many footsteps, how far apart, which direction they came from. Then Serena's heels clicked back. She had not left after all. Or she had stepped out and returned. I heard the door push open, heard her move to the window side of the room, away from the bed, as far from me as the room allowed. And then I heard the sound of a phone connecting. Gideon. Her voice was lower than it had been when Preston was in the room. Businesslike. The warmth she performed for audiences was completely absent. We're on schedule. The doctor confirmed this morning permanent damage, both eyes. He won't be reading anything independently. A pause while the other end responded. I slowed my breathing and held every word. No, he was still under when we were there. He didn't react to anything. Another pause. 2 weeks is fine. I want the transfer documents ready by the end of next week so we have time to review before you bring them in. Her voice dropped further. And Gideon, make sure the dosage instructions from your contact are correct this time. I'm not doing this twice. She ended the call. Her heels crossed back toward the door. She stopped. I felt the pause, the weight of someone deciding whether to look back, and then the door opened and closed behind her. Gideon. Dosage instructions. Transfer documents. I had a name now attached to a plan that was already further along than I had realized 30 minutes ago. I pressed the back of my head into the pillow and breathed through it slow and controlled, the way I had learned to breathe in rooms where showing any reaction was the same as losing ground. I had been in this business long enough to know the difference between an opponent who was improvising and one who had been preparing. Serena had been preparing. The call she had just made was not a call between people who were still working out the plan. It was a status update between people who had already built the blueprint and were now checking execution. I needed to think about how far back the blueprint went. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. I was starting to map the sounds of the room, the cycle of the air conditioning, the rhythm of the monitoring equipment, the muffled intercom announcements from somewhere down the hall, when the door opened again. One set of footsteps this time, flat-footed, too fast. Preston. He crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside the bed. I heard the vinyl creak under his weight. He did not say anything for a moment, and I could feel him looking at me, the specific discomfort of being studied by someone who believed you could not look back. You know what's funny? He said finally. His voice had the loose quality of a man who believed he was alone in a conversation. You always had to be the smartest person in the room. Every meeting, every negotiation, every dinner. Clifton Briggs, who built it all from scratch, who never needed anybody. He exhaled a short, humorless sound. Look at you now. I did not move. Serena thinks you might still be able to hear some of this, he continued. She told me not to come back in. But honestly, he leaned forward. I heard the chair shift. I kind of hope you can. I kind of hope you're lying there right now taking all of this in because I have been waiting a long time to say it to your face. My jaw tightened. I released it before it could register in any visible way. You cut me out of the Austin expansion. 2023. I ran that division for 3 years, and you restructured it out from under me without one conversation. Not one. You sent Frank Mercer to tell me. Your lawyer. His voice hardened at the edges. That's how you handled your own son. He stood up from the chair. I heard him move to the foot of the bed. So yeah, when Serena came to me with the idea, when she laid out what was possible, I listened. Because you taught me that business is business, right? You taught me that personal doesn't belong in the room. A pause. I just finally learned the lesson. He was at the door when he stopped. I heard him turn back. The DNA test comes back next week, he said, almost casual, like he was mentioning weather. Routine estate paperwork, Serena said. Just cleaning things up before the transfer. Another beat. Thought you should know. The door closed. I lay completely still and worked through what I had just heard, not the anger in it, Not the years of grievance that had spilled out in this hospital room, because Preston finally had an audience he believed couldn't respond. That could wait. What couldn't wait was the last part. DNA test. Routine estate paperwork. Nothing Preston Briggs did was routine. And nothing about the timing of a DNA test ordered in the week after his father's surgery left him blind was coincidental. There was something attached to that result that they needed. Something that only a DNA test could provide. I did not yet know what it was. But I had learned in 38 years of building something from nothing that the piece of information you cannot immediately explain is almost always the most important piece on the board. The door opened again. Different footsteps, this time soft-souled, deliberate, the quiet efficiency of someone trained to move through rooms without disturbing them. A nurse. Not the same one from earlier, this rhythm was different, more measured, like someone who was paying attention to more than the chart. Fingers on my wrist. A pulse check light and practiced. Then a pause 3-4 seconds longer than the routine required. Long enough to be intentional. The nurse, I could not see her, did not yet know her name, did not move away from the bed when she finished. I felt her standing there, evaluating something. Then she spoke, and her voice was low and even and completely professional. Mr. Briggs, your vitals are stable. You should feel some pressure behind the bandages over the next few days. That's completely normal. She adjusted something near the IV line on my right arm. I'll be checking in every hour through the evening shift. If you need anything, the call button is just under your left hand. She placed my hand over the call button as she said it. Standard procedure. But her fingers stayed on my wrist a half-second longer than they needed to. Not long enough for anyone watching to notice. Long enough for me to notice. I filed it away, the same way I had filed everything else in the past hour, carefully, completely, without letting any of it show on my face. I had a name, Gideon Marsh. I had a timeline, 2 weeks. I had a threat I did not yet fully understand, attached to a DNA test. And I had a nurse who had just held my wrist 1 beat too long in a room where everyone else believed I was not paying attention. In 38 years, I had built an empire on smaller foundations than this. By the time the evening shift began, I had mapped the room entirely by sound. The door hinges squeaked at a consistent pitch, the kind of squeak that tells you a maintenance team has been ignoring a work order for weeks. The air conditioning cycled every 14 minutes. The monitoring equipment beeped at 63 beats per minute, which was my resting heart rate, and had been since I was 50. The hallway outside went quiet somewhere around 7 in the evening, the daytime bustle tapering into the slower, more deliberate rhythm of a hospital settling into its night. I had also made a decision. I was not going to announce myself. Not yet. Not until I knew who in this building I could trust, and right now that number stood at exactly 0. Then the door opened, and everything changed. The footsteps were different from the day nurses. Lighter, yes, but that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the deliberateness of them, each step placed with the careful intention of someone who was paying close attention to something other than the floor. I had heard thousands of people walk into rooms over the course of my career, and I had learned that the way a person moved told you more about what they were thinking than anything they said out loud. This woman was thinking hard. She crossed to the monitors first. The usual sounds, fingers on keys, the soft beep of data being recorded. Then she came to the bed, and I felt 2 fingers pressed gently against the inside of my wrist. Standard pulse check. Textbook form. Nothing unusual, except she didn't let go. 4 seconds. 5. I counted them the way I had been counting everything since I woke up, precisely without letting the counting show anywhere on my face. A routine pulse check takes 2 seconds, maybe 3. This was not routine. Her fingers pressed down light, barely perceptible, 2 distinct times. A pause between them. Then she released my wrist and moved to the IV line, adjusting something with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. My heart rate wanted to climb. I held it down through sheer will, the same way I had held it down when Serena had stood over me this morning, with that word finally still warm in the air between us. The nurse straightened. I heard her make a note on the chart. Then, in the same unhurried professional voice she might use to tell any patient, "The weather," she said. "Mr. Briggs, your vitals are looking strong this evening. I'm going to leave a small notepad on the table to your left, standard procedure for patients in post-surgical bandaging who may want to communicate before they're ready to speak." She set something down on the table, the soft sound of a notepad on laminate, then a pen placed beside it. "I'll be back in an hour," she said. She left. The door closed. I counted to 60 before I moved. Then I reached left slowly, carefully, making sure the motion looked like the restless shifting of a sleeping man rather than the deliberate reach of someone with a destination, and my fingers found the notepad, found the pen, found tucked underneath the notepad a single folded piece of paper that had not been there before. I could not read it. Both eyes wrapped in gauze, and even if they hadn't been, the darkness would have made it impossible. I held the folded paper between two fingers and thought about the two deliberate presses against my wrist. Not accidental, not a muscle twitch. A signal patient, clear, designed for someone who needed everything communicated without words. This woman knew I was awake. She had known before she walked in. Something shifted in my chest, not hope exactly, because hope was a luxury I couldn't afford yet, but something adjacent to it. The small, fierce sensation of a door that you had assumed was locked, turning out to have some give in it after all. I pressed the folded paper flat against my palm and held it there. Her name, I would learn later, was Marin Toll. She had been the charge nurse on the evening rotation at Mercy Ridge for 6 years, efficient, precise, the kind of woman who noticed the things that other people's attention slid right past. She had worked alongside Dr. Harlow Peck on 3 previous surgical cases. She had also, I would learn, been watching him for 2 of those 3, but I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew, lying in that hospital bed with a folded piece of paper hidden in my palm, and the sound of the hallway settling into its nighttime quiet, was that someone in this building had seen through the performance, had seen through the bandages and the beeping monitors and the careful stillness, and had chosen to act on what they saw. I had learned one truth above all others in this business: the person who notices what everyone else walks past is always the most dangerous person in the room. Tonight, for the first time since I woke up in the dark, I was grateful for that. At 5:47 in the morning, the door to my room opened. I knew it was Marin before she reached the bed. 6 years on the same rotation had given her footsteps a pattern I had already memorized, measured deliberate, the walk of someone who never moved without knowing exactly where she was going. I heard the soft click of the door locking behind her. Then she came straight to the bed and pressed 2 fingers against my wrist. "Our signal. I'm here. Are you ready?" I pressed back once. "Yes." 15 minutes, she said, her voice barely a breath above nothing. "Before the charge nurse starts her rounds. I need you to hear everything before you respond to any of it." "1 press, go ahead." She pulled the chair close and sat down. I heard her exhale, not from nerves, but the exhale of someone who had been carrying something heavy and was finally setting it down. "3 days before your surgery," she began, "Dr. Harlow Peck received a wire transfer of $48,000 into a personal account. A wire transfer leaves a permanent electronic trail. It cannot be erased cleanly. The money came from a shell company. That's a business that exists on paper, but does nothing real. It's used to move money while hiding where it actually came from." She paused 1 beat. "The registered agent of that shell company, the person legally named as responsible for it, is Serena Voss." The pain that moved through my chest was sharp and hot, and had nothing to do with the surgery. I pressed my palms flat against the mattress to keep my hands from shaking. "How did you find this?" I pressed twice, then once more. "Explain." "I have someone outside this hospital who knows how to pull financial filings without triggering flags," Marin said. I'm not going to say more than that right now. What I need you to know is that the information is solid. A beat. It's solid, Mr. Briggs. One press. Continue. I also pulled your OR log. She leaned closer. I could feel the warmth of her voice near my shoulder. The OR log is the official record of your operating room, every instrument, every person, every procedure time-stamped from the moment you were wheeled in to the moment you left. It's a legal document. Nothing in that room is supposed to go unrecorded. Her voice tightened. There is a 12-minute gap between 10:41 and 10:53 in the morning. 12 minutes where the log records nothing. My jaw locked so hard my back teeth ached. The nerve damage in your left eye, she continued, is consistent with complications that can occur in retinal surgery, genuine surgical risk, even in proper procedures. But your right eye is different. The damage pattern doesn't match an instrument slipping or a complication developing naturally. It matches a secondary instrument being introduced into the eye during those 12 unrecorded minutes. Someone deliberately blinded my right eye, I said. My voice came out raw. 3 days without real use had stripped it down to something rough and uneven. During 12 minutes that don't exist on paper. That's what the evidence points to, Marin said. I've been in operating rooms for 11 years. I know what normal surgical damage looks like. This isn't that. Peck didn't do it alone. No. There was a second person in that OR during the gap. I haven't identified them yet. She shifted in her chair. There's something else you need to know. I waited, my hands still pressed hard into the mattress. Serena has been here every single day since your surgery, Marin said. She asks the nursing staff questions that go well beyond what a worried wife asks. She wants to know about your cognitive responsiveness. She's asked whether patients in post-surgical bandaging can retain information they hear. And she's been asking about the process for establishing medical power of attorney when a patient is classified as non-responsive. The controlled anger underneath her professional voice was unmistakable now. 2 days ago, she asked me directly. She wanted to know whether I believed you would remember conversations from your recovery period. What did you tell her? I told her that patients in your condition typically have significant gaps in post-surgical recall. A short pause. It was the most useful answer I could give her at the time. My throat tightened. This woman had been running interference before I even knew she existed. Before I had given her a single reason to put herself at risk for me. Why? The word came out before I could dress it up into something more measured. Why are you doing any of this? Marin was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone without an answer, but the quiet of someone deciding where to begin. 15 years ago, I was 26, she said, working as a site medic on a construction project in Galveston. There was a scaffolding collapse, bad one. The site contractor filed the incident report in a way that put the liability on me and 2 other workers. Made it look like I'd made a medical error during the first response that caused the second injury. She let that sit. The owner of the materials company that supplied that site found out what the contractor was doing. His company's legal exposure was minimal, he didn't have to touch it. But he pulled the contractor's account, gave a signed statement to the labor board, and covered the legal fees for all 3 of us out of his own pocket. Her voice didn't break, but I heard the weight that had lived in it for 15 years. That was you, Mr. Briggs. I don't imagine you remember it. It was probably one decision among hundreds that year. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with anger. I remember Galveston, I said quietly. Then you understand why I'm here. She stood, moved the chair back to its exact original position, removing every trace of the conversation from the room's geometry. I need a name. Someone outside this hospital you trust without reservation. Someone I can reach without going through any channel Serena or hospital administration could monitor. I didn't hesitate. I raised my left hand, turned it palm up. Marin understood immediately. She placed the notepad beneath my fingers and guided the pen into my hand. I wrote in the dark by feel on a page I could not see Frank Mercer. His phone number beneath it, 11 digits I had carried in my memory for 22 years without ever needing to look them up. Then one word below that. Tonight. Maren lifted the notepad, the soft sound of paper tearing from the pad. A moment of quiet while she read it. Tonight, she confirmed. I'll call from the payphone at the gas station 2 blocks north. Not my cell, nothing traceable. She moved toward the door. And Mr. Briggs, don't open your eyes for anyone until I tell you it's safe. Not for anyone you recognize. Not for anyone who says they're here to help. Maren. She stopped. The second person in that OR, find them. I will, she said. The lock clicked open. Her footsteps faded into the hallway. I lay in the dark and steadied my breathing. Somewhere 2 blocks north, a payphone was about to connect to Frank Mercer, the one man alive who knew every layer of protection my mother had built into her estate before she died. The one man Serena had no idea existed in this equation. She had built a plan to take everything I owned. She had paid a surgeon, prepared the paperwork, managed the timeline down to the week. But she had made one mistake that people like her always made. She had assumed that a man lying blind in a hospital bed had already run out of moves. They arrived at 9. I knew it was 9 because the hospital intercom ran its morning announcement at 8:50, and I had been counting the minutes since. 3 sets of footsteps this time. Serena's heels, first deliberate, unhurried the pace of a woman who had already decided how the morning would end. Preston, a half step behind her, moving faster than the situation required, the way he always did when he was trying to keep up with something he had helped set in motion. And a third set, unhurried, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who believed he was in complete control of every room he walked into. That third set belonged to Gideon Marsh. I had never met him. But I had spent 38 years reading people by the way they moved, and I already knew the type, the kind of estate attorney who had built his career on finding the legal seams in other people's lives and pulling them apart with smooth, well-compensated precision. The door closed. I felt the room shift with 3 bodies in it. Marsh moved first. A briefcase set down on the table, the sound of latches releasing papers being arranged. Methodical. Unhurried. The sounds of a man who had done this many times before. He looks worse than I expected, Preston said. His voice came from the foot of the bed. Not quiet enough, never quiet enough when Serena wasn't watching him directly. That works in our favor, Marsh said. Flat, professional. The tone of someone discussing inventory rather than a human being. The more compromised he appears in the initial assessment, the cleaner the power of attorney filing looks. I kept my face slack and my hands loose against the mattress. The performance of my life delivered to an audience that believed they had already won. Serena's heels clicked to the side of the bed. I felt her lean close, and her perfume hit me like a hand pressed over my mouth. That same French scent, the one I had bought her, now turned into something that made my stomach turn. Clifton. Her voice was soft, wifely. The performance she ran for witnesses and medical staff. We're here, honey. You just rest. She straightened up, and her voice dropped back to its real register, aimed at Marsh across the bed. How long for the first filing? We submit the non-responsive assessment to the probate court by end of week, Marsh said, the rustle of papers punctuating his words. That initiates the medical power of attorney review. Once the court accepts the assessment, 3 to 5 business days typically, we have legal authority to act on his behalf regarding the asset transfer. And the transfer itself. 2 stages. First, management authority over Briggs Materials moves to the interim board structure we've already incorporated. Second, the primary operating accounts redirect to the new holding entity. A pause. Once both are executed, the process is legally irreversible within 72 hours. Preston made a sound, satisfied, like a man crossing something off a list he had been carrying too long. So Friday, he said. We bring the full package Friday. Friday, Marsh confirmed. But I need the dosage adjustment implemented by tomorrow evening at the latest. I need him compliant enough to execute the signature without retaining the details clearly. If he wakes up Thursday and starts asking coherent questions to the nursing staff, it complicates the assessment filing. The cold in my chest spread outward until I could feel it in my fingertips. Dosage adjustment. The phrase landed exactly the way Preston's words had landed yesterday, with the casual precision of people who had stopped thinking of me as a person and started thinking of me as a procedural obstacle. Friday. I had 4 days. Serena, the night nurse, is she going to be a problem? Marsh, which one? The one on the evening rotation. Toll, she asks too many questions. A pause. I heard Marsh close his briefcase. Make sure she's off the schedule Friday evening, he said. Request a staffing change through administration. A personal reason, something routine. I don't want anyone on that floor Friday night who hasn't been briefed on the situation. Consider it done, Serena said. Preston stepped closer to the bed. I felt his shadow fall across me even in the dark, and his voice dropped to something that was almost private, almost like he was speaking to me rather than over me. Sign the papers when they tell you to, he said. That's all you have to do. Make it easy on yourself for once. Then Serena's hand touched Preston's arm, that same controlling gesture I had noticed yesterday. But this time Preston pulled back. A small motion. A half-second of resistance. Don't, he said quietly. Preston, I said don't. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. Something beneath the surface pulling in a direction that wasn't entirely aligned with hers. 3 seconds of charged air. Then Marsh's footsteps moved toward the door with the deliberate pace of a man who had learned to exit rooms before conflicts developed. Friday, he said from the doorway. Have the documents countersigned before I arrive. The door opened and closed. Serena and Preston left 30 seconds later separately, I noticed. Different pacing. Different timing. Something had shifted in that room, and neither of them had named it out loud. I lay in the dark after the last footstep faded and ran the inventory. Friday. Dosage adjustment by tomorrow evening. Marin to be pulled from the schedule. Transfer in 2 stages, management authority first, then operating accounts, irreversible in 72 hours. And Preston had pulled his arm away from Serena's hand. That last detail was small. In another situation, I might have filed it as noise. But I had spent 38 years watching the moment when 2 people who were supposed to be on the same side started pulling in slightly different directions. That half-second of resistance was almost always the first crack in a foundation that was about to give. I had 4 days, and Serena had just told me without realizing it that the structure she had built her plan on wasn't as solid as she believed. Serena came back alone at 2 in the afternoon. I heard her before the door opened, the particular rhythm of her heels, when she was performing something slower and more deliberate than her natural pace, the walk she used when she wanted to be observed doing the right thing. She pushed the door open and said something cheerful to whoever was at the nurse's station, loud enough to carry. Just bringing him some homemade soup. The hospital food is terrible. The door closed behind her. The room filled with the smell of chicken broth, warm, familiar, the kind of smell that was designed to communicate care. She set something on the table beside my bed. A container. Plastic lid being peeled back. I made this myself this morning, she said, in the wifely voice she kept polished for public use. The nurse said it was okay to bring outside food as long as it's liquid. You need to keep your strength up, Clifton. She pulled the chair close and sat down, and I heard the clink of a spoon against the container. Dosage adjustment by tomorrow evening. That was what Marsh had said 4 hours ago. And here was Serena at 2 in the afternoon with homemade soup. I opened my mouth when the spoon came close, just enough to be convincing. Let the warm broth touch my lips. Then I turned my head slightly to the side and let a cough move through me, the weak, rattling kind that belonged to a man in recovery, and I felt the liquid move into the cloth of the hospital gown at my shoulder instead of down my throat. Serena made a soft sound, concerned performance grade. Oh, honey, take it slow. She tried twice more. Each time I managed the same routine, a small movement, a weak cough, enough going into the cloth that she could believe the rest had gone down. After the third attempt, she set the spoon down. I'll leave it here, she said. The nurse can help you with the rest when she comes in. Her heels clicked toward the door. She stopped. You're going to be okay, she said. The warmth in her voice was so perfectly constructed that if I hadn't heard her in this same room yesterday, with her real voice, I might have felt something when she said it. The door closed. I lay completely still and counted to 100. Then I reached left and found the container of soup on the table with my fingers. Still warm. I pressed the lid back onto it and set it on the far edge of the table where it would be visible to anyone who came into the room. I needed Maren to see it exactly where Serena had left it. She came in at 7:15, right on the start of her evening shift. The first thing she did after checking my monitors was cross to the table. I heard her pause when she noticed the container. She brought food. Maren said, her voice dropping immediately. 1 press, yes. Did you eat any of it? 2 presses, no. The sound of a drawer opening. The small clink of something being placed, a collection vial, I guessed. The soft pop of a lid being unsealed. Then the careful sound of liquid being transferred from the container into whatever she was using. I'm taking a sample, she said quietly. I have a contact at an independent lab in Midtown, not affiliated with Mercy Ridge, not in any system Serena could flag. Results will take 48 hours. The drawer closed. I'm also replacing the container with water so it looks untouched. 1 press, good. There's something else. She came back to the bed, and her voice dropped even further, close to my ear. I called Frank Mercer last night from the payphone like I said. My pulse jumped. I felt it before I could control it, a single hard beat against my ribs that had nothing to do with the monitors. He picked up on the second ring, Maren said. Like he'd been waiting. What did he say? My voice came out rough and urgent, and I didn't try to smooth it. He said he'd been trying to reach you for 3 days. He said he knew something was wrong the moment you went into surgery, and he couldn't get through to anyone at the hospital who would give him a straight answer. She paused. He's coming tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock before the day shift starts. I have a colleague who can get him credentials as a medical legal consultant. It'll hold up to front desk scrutiny. The relief that moved through me was physical, a loosening in my shoulders that I hadn't realized I had been holding for 2 days straight. Frank Mercer was coming. 22 years of working together, and the man had already known something was wrong before I'd had the chance to tell him. He said something else, Maren continued, and something in her tone made me go still. Tell me, he said, there's someone else involved in this case. Someone he needs to tell you about in person. She adjusted the IV line, a small routine gesture that gave her hands something to do while she said the next part. He wouldn't give me a name. He said you need to hear it from him directly. My mind moved through the possibilities, the way I moved through a balance sheet methodically, without skipping lines. Someone Frank knew about that I didn't. Someone connected to this case who was not Serena, not Preston, not Marsh, not Peck. Did he sound worried? I asked. Maren considered the question for a moment. No, she said. He sounded like a man who had been sitting on important information and was relieved he finally had somewhere to put it. That told me more than a direct answer would have. Frank Mercer had been a lawyer for 40 years. When he was worried, his voice went flat and careful. When he was relieved, that was when things were about to move in a direction that had been waiting to move for a long time. 6 o'clock, I said. 6 o'clock, Maren confirmed. She moved toward the door. Try to sleep, Mr. Briggs. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I pressed one finger into the mattress, our signal for understood, and listened to the door close behind her. 48 hours for the lab results on the soup. Frank Mercer at 6 in the morning with a name I didn't have yet. Friday, still 4 days away. And somewhere inside this building, A container of chicken broth that Serena Voss had carried in with her own hands was about to tell me exactly what she thought of my survival. I had been in worse positions than this. I had built something from nothing in positions worse than this. But I had never before had the specific cold satisfaction of knowing that the person trying to destroy me had just handed me the evidence to stop them in a bowl of homemade soup with a smile on her face. Preston came alone on the third morning. I heard it in his footsteps the moment he pushed through the door, that particular looseness that came over him and wasn't in the room. Like a man who had been holding himself at a certain angle all day and finally let his shoulders drop. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down hard, the vinyl creaking under his weight. And for a long moment, the only sounds in the room were the monitors and the distant hum of the hallway outside. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it, exhaled sharply through his nose the sound of a man who had been getting calls he didn't want to take, and shoved it back in his pocket. 340,000, he said to no one in particular, or to me, which was the same thing as far as he was concerned. That's what I owe. You want to know how it got that far? Because every time I got close to paying it down, something else came up. That's how it works with those people. They keep moving the line. He laughed a short, ugly sound. You'd know something about that, actually. Moving the line. Making people think they're almost there when they're not. Every word went into the same place I had been storing everything for 3 days, precisely, completely, without letting it show on my face. She found me, by the way. His voice shifted, something almost defensive creeping into it, like a man who had been rehearsing a justification and was finally delivering it to the only audience available. Serena, I know you probably think I went looking for her. I didn't. She came to me 14 months ago, sat down across from me at a bar in Midtown, and told me she knew about the debt, and she had a way to make it disappear. He leaned forward in the chair. I heard it creak. She knew things about your holdings that I didn't even know. Account structures, property valuations, the trust framework. She'd done her homework long before she ever walked into that bar. My throat tightened. 14 months. Serena had been building this from 14 months before I went into surgery. I told her I needed to think about it, Preston continued. She gave me a week, came back with a full breakdown, how the transfer would work, how the power of attorney filing would be framed, how long each stage would take. She had Marsh already lined up. The whole thing was built. A pause. All she needed was me. Someone on the inside. Someone you'd believe. He stood up from the chair. Abruptly, I heard him start to pace 3 steps toward the window, 3 steps back. The restless energy of a man whose conscience was doing something uncomfortable, and he didn't have the tools to sit with it. The surgery wasn't part of the original plan. The words came out faster now, like he needed to get them out before he could talk himself back into silence. I want you to know that. The original plan was just the paperwork. Get you to sign while you were weak from recovery. That was it. The eye thing making it permanent, that was Serena's addition. She told me 3 weeks before the procedure. Said it was the only way to guarantee you couldn't reverse the filings later. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, a fracture he covered immediately with a cough. I didn't say no. That's on me. I know that. A long breath. She has an account you don't know about, he said. Offshore. Cayman structure. I found out Thursday when I started going through the holding entity documents Marsh gave me. Half the transfer was going there, not to both of us. Just her. His voice hardened with the specific fury of a man who had been played by the same hand he thought he was holding. I confronted her about it, and she looked me straight in the eye and told me I was misreading the documents. 14 months of planning together, and she looked me straight in the eye. He stopped pacing. You know the worst part? His voice dropped quieter than I had heard it in years, stripped of the anger and the performance and the rehearsed justifications. I knew what she was the first week. I could see it. I've seen enough people running angles in my life to recognize the shape of it. But the debt was real, and the plan worked on paper, and He exhaled long and ragged. I let myself need it to be different than what it was. He was at the foot of the bed now, standing very still. I don't expect anything from you, he said. I'm not here for that. I just needed to say it somewhere that felt real. He turned to leave, and then I made a decision. I let my right hand move. Just slightly. Just enough. A small shift against the mattress, the kind of movement a man makes when consciousness is pulling him up from somewhere deep. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Exactly the amount of movement that might make someone in that room stop and look. Preston stopped. Dad, the word came out like something he hadn't intended to say, raw and unguarded, and nothing like the man who had stood over me 2 days ago, telling me to sign the papers and make it easy on myself. His voice shook on that single syllable in a way that made my chest ache with the complicated weight of everything the word carried between us. I did not open my eyes. I let my hand go still again. Preston stood at the foot of the bed for a long moment, his breathing uneven. Then he cleared his throat, the sound of a man pulling himself back together piece by piece. DNA test comes back next week. He said, his voice steadier but still not what it had been before that single word. Like I told you before, routine estate paperwork. A pause that lasted 2 beats too long. Serena set it up, not me. I want you to know that. His footsteps moved to the door. He stopped one more time. You built something real, he said quietly. I never said that to you. I was too angry for too long to say it. But it's true. The door closed. I pressed the back of my head into the pillow and breathed through the burning behind my eyes. Not from the surgery, not from the bandages, but from the specific grief of a man who had just heard his son speak to him honestly for the first time in 20 years and had been unable to answer. The DNA test. Serena set it up. Not Preston. That detail sat differently than everything else he had said. Preston had spent 14 months inside this plan, and there was one piece of it he was drawing a clear line around. The DNA test was hers, not his. He wanted me to know that. Why would a DNA test matter enough for him to separate himself from it? I lay in the dark and turned that question over until the answer started to take shape. And when it did, the cold that moved through me had nothing to do with the air conditioning. At 5:58 in the morning, Marin knocked twice on the door, our signal for someone is coming, who is safe, and then it opened. Frank Mercer walked in with the same energy he had brought into every room I had ever shared with him over 22 years, unhurried, completely certain of his footing. The particular steadiness of a man who had spent 4 decades making sure other people's foundations held. I heard his footsteps cross the room and stop at the side of my bed, and I felt the weight of him settle into the chair before he spoke. Clifton. His voice was lower than usual, calibrated to the room. I know you can hear me. Marin told me everything. We have about 20 minutes before the day shift starts, so I'm going to talk fast, and I need you to listen to all of it. I pressed once against the mattress, our signal which Marin had evidently explained to him. Good, Frank said. First, the estate is intact. Serena filed for interim medical power of attorney on day 4 of your hospitalization. She cited your non-responsive status and your husband's distress. He stopped. Her words, not mine. The filing was accepted on a limited basis by the hospital's legal team. But here's the thing she didn't know. Your mother's estate documents contain a specific provision that I drafted in 2010, and that provision defines the authorization chain for any major asset transaction. It requires independent verification at 3 stages. Stage 3 requires a signature from the trust's independent legal counsel. He paused 1 beat. That's me, Clifton. She needed my signature to complete the transfer, and she didn't know I existed in that capacity. The relief that hit me was so sudden and so physical that my hand jerked against the mattress before I could stop it. 22 years of working with this man and my mother, who had met Frank exactly 4 times before she died, had trusted him enough to anchor her protection to his name. She built it well, I said. My voice was rough, but it held. She built it better than she knew, Frank said. Now, there's something else, and I need you to prepare yourself before I say it. My jaw tightened. Say it. Frank leaned forward. I heard the chair shift. 8 months ago, the district attorney's office in Harris County opened an investigation into Gideon Marsh. Not for this case, for a case in Baton Rouge 3 years ago. A client in circumstances similar to yours. Elderly, incapacitated assets transferred through a structure very similar to what Marsh built for Serena. That client died 6 weeks after the transfer. Ruled natural causes. His voice was flat and steady. The voice he used when he was delivering information he wanted me to receive clearly and without interference from his own reaction to it. The DA's office connected Marsh to your situation through the Baton Rouge investigation 8 weeks ago. They've been running a parallel track ever since. Who's leading it? I asked. Frank was quiet for 3 full seconds. The lead prosecutor on the Marsh investigation is a man named Callum Reed, he said. He's 31 years old. He's been with the Harris County DA's office for 4 years. And 6 weeks ago, he contacted me directly. Another pause. He told me he had been aware of his parentage since he was 24 years old. He told me his mother was Diana Reed. She worked at your Austin office from 1993 to 1996. The room tilted. Not physically, but something in the architecture of everything I thought I knew shifted so fundamentally that for a moment I could not locate the floor. Diana, I said. The name came out of me like something that had been stored somewhere I hadn't opened in 30 years. She passed in 2019, Frank said gently. Callum said she spoke about you without anger. He said she described it the way you'd describe whether something that happened, something that shaped things. My throat closed entirely. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose and waited for the burning behind the bandages to subside enough that I could speak. He's 31, I said finally. 31, Frank confirmed. He chose law specifically because of what he found out about you. He said he wanted to understand the systems that could protect something like what you built, and the systems that could be used to dismantle it. A beat. He's been on the right side of that question his whole career. I pressed one hand flat against the mattress to stop it from shaking. The son I had never known existed was 31 years old and was currently the lead prosecutor on the case that could put Gideon Marsh in federal prison. Does he know about Serena? I asked. About what's happening here. He knows everything, Frank said. Marin's recordings, she sent copies to his office 4 days ago. He's been building the criminal case around them since. The chair shifted as Frank leaned closer. He needs one more thing. A formal statement from you. Even short, even recorded, your voice, your account on the record. It closes the chain of evidence. I'll give it, I said. No hesitation. None. I told him you would. I heard something in Frank's voice, then not sentiment, because Frank Mercer was constitutionally allergic to sentiment, but the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been holding a complicated truth for 6 weeks and was finally watching it land where it needed to go. He wants to come see you, not as a prosecutor. He said when you're ready, his words exactly. My chest cracked open in a way that I had no name for and no framework to contain. A son I had not known about, who had built a career aimed at exactly this kind of protection, who was standing at the edges of a case that was about to collapse an entire architecture of betrayal, and who had said, when you're ready, with the patience of someone who understood that some distances could not be crossed quickly. Frank. My voice came out rough and uneven, and I didn't try to smooth it. The statement. Can we do it tonight? Tonight, Frank confirmed. He stood, and I heard him straighten his jacket, the same gesture he made at the end of every meeting we had ever had the physical signal that the work portion was concluded and everything that followed would be execution. "I'll coordinate with Marin and Clifton." He stopped at the door. "Your mother put my name in those documents because she trusted me to hold." I held. "I know you did," I said. The door opened and closed. I lay in the dark with both hands open at my sides and let the monitors track what I could not. The biological fact of being alive still in a room where someone had decided I should no longer be. I did not have the vocabulary yet for what I was feeling. I only knew it was larger than fear, and that it had a name I would learn later. A son I had never seen. A prosecutor who had spent his career building exactly the tools this moment required. Diana Reed had raised him well. She had raised him without bitterness, without an agenda, without pointing him toward me as either a villain or a salvation. She had simply raised a man who knew which side of the law to stand on. And tonight, for the first time, I was going to speak to him. My mother was not a sentimental woman. She grew up in Beaumont during the 50s, the daughter of a man who lost everything twice before he was 40 and rebuilt himself both times without complaint. She had inherited his practicality the way some people inherit eye color completely without dilution. When she built her estate in the last years of her life, she built it the way she had built everything else, with the assumption that the world would try to take it apart, and with enough hidden architecture to make that attempt expensive. I had never told Serena about Frank Mercer's role in the estate documents. I had never told Preston. The only person outside of Frank's office who knew the full structure was me, and I had kept it that way deliberately, not out of paranoia, but out of the same logic my mother had used when she built the thing in the first place. The people most likely to try to take something from you are almost always the people closest to you when you're most vulnerable. She had known that. I had learned it from her. Marin came in at 5:40 that morning, 10 minutes earlier than her usual start, which told me she had something to say before the day shift arrived and made private conversation impossible. She locked the door. She pressed twice against my wrist. "Frank called me last night," she said, her voice barely above breath. "After he left, he went through the estate documents again, all of them. He found something Serena missed." My pulse jumped. One press. "Tell me." "Your mother's trust includes an incapacity clause," Marin said. "That's standard in Texas's estate planning. It defines what happens to the trust assets if the primary beneficiary is declared legally incapacitated. Most incapacity clauses are straightforward. Your mother's is not." She shifted her weight. "The clause requires that any declaration of incapacity be confirmed by two physicians who have no affiliation with the treating facility. Not just independent, completely unaffiliated. Different hospital system, different practice group, no shared credentialing." I pressed once. "Continue." "Serena used Dr. Harlow Peck and a colleague of his from the same Mercy Ridge medical group to file the non-responsive assessment with the probate court," Marin said. "Both of them are credentialed through the same hospital system. Both of them are affiliated with Mercy Ridge." A pause. "Under the terms of your mother's clause, their assessment is legally insufficient to trigger the incapacity provision. The transfer filing Marsh submitted is built on a foundation that doesn't hold." The breath that moved through me was so sharp and sudden that I felt it in my back teeth. A lifetime of building things, and my mother sitting at her desk in the last months of her life, managing the details of an estate she knew she would never see administered, had inserted one precise condition that rendered everything Serena and Marsh had spent 14 months constructing legally worthless. "She knew," I said. My voice cracked on the word, and I didn't try to fix it. "Frank said she called him the week before she passed," Marin said, and her voice softened in a way I hadn't heard from her before, the softness of someone who understood that the information she was delivering was not just legal strategy, but something much older and heavier than that. She wanted to go through the documents one more time. They spent 3 hours on the phone. She made 2 small changes. a beat. One of them was the affiliation requirement in the incapacity clause. My throat closed entirely. I pressed my palm against my sternum and breathed through the tightening there, the specific grief of a woman I had buried 10 years ago reaching forward, through a legal document, to stand between me and the thing that was trying to destroy what she had left me. She added it that week, I said. Yes, Marin said. Frank said she didn't explain why. She just said she wanted one more layer. One more layer. My mother, 81 years old, 3 weeks from the end of her life, adding one more layer to a trust document for a daughter. A son she was trying to protect from threats. She could not name but could feel coming, the way you feel weather before it arrives. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and held it there until I was certain my voice would come out even. What does Frank need? I asked. He's filing an emergency motion with the Harris County Probate Court today. Marin said, her voice returning to its precise professional register. The motion will cite the affiliation violation in Serena's assessment filing and request an immediate freeze on all trust-related transactions pending a full capacity review. He's requesting an emergency hearing for Monday. That's 3 days away, I said. Marsh is coming Friday. I know, Marin said. Frank's motion will be on file before Marsh arrives. Once it's on the court's docket, any transfer Marsh executes on Friday becomes immediately contestable, and Frank says the affiliation violation is clear enough that the court will likely issue a temporary restraining order within hours of receiving the filing. One press. Good. There's one more thing Frank needs from you, Marin said carefully. He needs confirmation that you have the cognitive capacity to challenge the non-responsive assessment. Not just my observations, your own statement on record establishing that you were aware and responsive during the period Serena and Peck claimed you were not. She paused. He needs your voice, Clifton. Dated, time-stamped, witnessed. Tonight, I said immediately. I'll give it tonight. Callum Reed is coordinating with Frank on the evidentiary side, Marin said. He's filing his own emergency motion through the DA's office, a parallel track requesting criminal investigation authorization for the wire transfer to Peck and the OR log tampering. Both motions together create a wall that Marsh cannot file through on Friday without immediate legal exposure. Something tightened in my chest, not grief this time, not the burning behind the bandages, but the specific sensation I had learned to recognize over 38 years, whenever a deal that had been moving against me suddenly found its direction. The sensation of pieces that had been scattered finding their correct positions all at once. Frank built the legal wall, I said. Callum builds the criminal case. Marin builds the medical evidence. And I give the statement that connects all three. That's exactly right, Marin said. I pressed one finger into the mattress. Not our usual signal, just the gesture of a man anchoring himself to something solid, while the rest of the world rearranged itself around him. My mother had added one clause to a document 10 years ago in the last week of her life without explaining why. She had known something. She had not known exactly what, but she had known enough to add one more layer. It had held. Against 14 months of planning against a paid surgeon, against a set of forged assessments filed with a probate court, one clause my mother had added, in a 3-hour phone call, had held the entire structure in place long enough for the people who loved me to find their way to this room. Marin. She stopped at the door. Thank you for all of it. From the beginning. She was quiet for a moment. The quiet of someone receiving something they had not expected to be acknowledged. Your mother built something worth protecting, she said. I just helped make sure the right people knew it was still standing. The door closed. I lay in the dark with my hand pressed flat over my heart, feeling it beat steady, present the rhythm of a man who was still here. Friday was 2 days away. And for the first time since I woke up in this room, I was not counting down to Friday with dread. I was counting down to it with something that felt very much like patience. We are halfway through, and I need to ask you something. Are you still with me? If you are, type, I'm here, in the comments. That is all. Just let me know you have not left yet. What comes next is the part I almost did not tell anyone. Quick note: portions of this story include fictional elements added to protect privacy and serve the lesson. If you prefer stories without any fiction woven in, feel free to choose something else, but if you are staying, hold on tight. Frank Mercer came back that evening. This time, he didn't need the medical legal consultant cover Marin had cleared him through as a family attorney consulting on estate matters, which was accurate enough to hold up to any front desk scrutiny and bland enough that nobody would look twice. I heard his footsteps in the hallway before the door opened, and I felt the particular steadiness of his presence enter the room, the same way I always had, like a building that had been standing long enough to stop needing to prove it. He sat down. He placed something on the table beside my bed. I heard the flat sound of a folder being set down on laminate. "The emergency motion was filed at 4:17 this afternoon," he said without preamble. "Harris County Probate Court. The affiliation violation in Serena's incapacity assessment is documented, cited, and on the record. The duty judge will review it tonight." He paused. "I've done this for 40 years. The violation is clean. They'll issue the temporary freeze. One press." Good. My voice was being saved for what came next. "Callum's motion went in simultaneously," Frank continued. "Criminal investigation authorization through the DA's office, wire transfer to Peck or log tampering, and the shell company structure. Both motions together mean that when Marsh walks in Friday morning, the first thing his phone will tell him is that every transaction he planned to execute is frozen pending court review. He's a careful man. He will not move forward a beat. He'll know immediately that something collapsed from the inside." The door opened again. Marin came in, locked it behind her, and crossed to stand beside Frank. The three of us in the room, a lawyer, a nurse, and a blind man in a hospital bed, were the entirety of the architecture that was going to dismantle what Serena Voss had spent 14 months building. "Before we do the statement," Marin said, "there's something I should have told you sooner." Her voice had a different quality than usual, careful in the way of someone who has been weighing the right moment and has decided it has arrived. "I've been recording them since the second day." The room went very still. "What?" My voice came out rough and sharp. "I placed a device inside the reading lamp frame on your second night," Marin said. "Small, about the size of a thumb drive. Battery-powered, no wireless signal, nothing that would show on any scan. It's been running continuously since day 2. She exhaled slowly. "It recorded everything. Serena's conversations with Preston, Marsh's visit, Preston's visit alone. Everything said in this room when they believed you were not processing it." My hands were trembling again, not from anger this time, but from something that felt dangerously close to the edge of a composure I had been maintaining for 5 days straight. I pressed both palms flat and breathed. "How many copies?" I asked. 3, Marin said. "The first is with Frank. I gave it to him this morning when he arrived. The second is in a safety deposit box at a First National branch 2 miles from here. Only I have the key." She paused. "The third I sent to Callum Reed's office 4 days ago." Frank leaned forward in his chair. "Callum has had the recordings for 4 days, he said. "He waited because he needed your statement to close the evidentiary chain. The recordings establish what was said. Your statement establishes that you heard it, that you were cognitively present, and that the non-responsive assessment filed by Peck was false." His voice was steady and direct, the voice he used when he needed me to understand something completely. "Without your statement, the recordings are strong but challengeable. With it, they're airtight." "Then let's do it," I said. Marin placed her phone on the pillow beside my mouth, close enough to capture clearly angled, so the recording quality would hold. She opened the voice memo app. Frank sat forward with a legal pad on his knee. "State your full name," Frank said. "Clifton James Briggs. The date, Thursday, the 5th day after my surgery at Mercy Ridge Hospital in Houston, Texas. Are you currently in full possession of your cognitive faculties?" Yes. My voice came out clear and certain. I have been since I regained consciousness on the morning of my first post-surgical day. I have been fully aware of my surroundings, my situation, and the conversations that have occurred in this room during that entire period. Frank nodded. I heard the scratch of his pen. Describe in your own words what you heard upon regaining consciousness. I told it from the beginning. Every word Serena had said. Every word Preston had said. Marsh's visit, the dosage adjustment, the Friday timeline. Preston alone, the offshore account, the DNA test. I spoke for 11 minutes without stopping, in the same flat, precise voice I had used for 38 years, when the details of a thing mattered more than the emotion attached to them. My voice roughened twice, once when I described Preston saying "Dad" at the foot of the bed, and once when I described Marsh saying "make it look like his heart gave out." And both times I pushed through it without stopping, because stopping would have cost me the precision I needed. When I finished, the room held the specific weight of something that had been said and could not be unsaid. "That's enough," Frank said quietly. "That's more than enough." Marin stopped the recording. "I'm sending this to Callum's secure line right now," she said. "Encrypted transfer. He'll have it within the hour." "Does he know we did this tonight?" I asked. "He's been waiting for it," Frank said. "He told me this afternoon. He said to tell you he'll file the supplemental motion the moment it arrives." A pause. "He also said something else." "Tell me." Frank's voice shifted slightly, dropping the professional register, just enough to let something more human come through underneath it. "He said to tell you he's not going anywhere. Whatever happens Friday, whatever happens Monday at the hearing, he's not going anywhere." The burning came back behind the bandages, sharp and sudden, and completely beyond my ability to contain this time. I pressed the back of my wrist against my eyes through the gauze and held it there until the worst of it passed. A 31-year-old man I had never seen, who had built his entire career on exactly the kind of work this moment required, was sitting somewhere in this city right now, waiting for an encrypted audio file that would let him move against the people who had tried to kill me slowly and quietly in a hospital room. "He's not going anywhere. Frank." My voice came out uneven and I let it. "The statement I gave tonight, is it enough?" "It's everything," Frank said simply. Outside the window, somewhere beyond the bandages and the gauze and the institutional dark of the room, Houston was doing what it always did at this hour, moving building, running the machinery of a city that had never once stopped for anyone's grief, or anyone's betrayal, or anyone's carefully constructed plan to take what didn't belong to them. Friday was one day away, and for the first time in 5 days, I was not the one in this equation who had a reason to be afraid of it. The hospital hit its quietest point somewhere around 11 at night. I had learned the rhythm of it over 5 days, the way the hallway outside reduced to a single set of footsteps every 22 minutes, the security guard doing his rounds with the unhurried pace of a man who had walked the same path long enough that his feet knew it without consulting his brain. Marin had timed it. She had timed everything. She came in at 11:15, locked the door, and placed her personal phone on the pillow beside my left ear. "He's on the line," she said. "I'm stepping back. This one's yours." My throat tightened. I pressed one hand flat against the mattress to stop it from trembling. And for the first time in 5 days, the trembling had nothing to do with anger or pain or the cold calculation of a man managing a crisis. It had everything to do with the fact that the voice I was about to hear belonged to a person I had not known existed until 36 hours ago. "Mr. Briggs." The voice was steady and low-calibrated for the hour and the situation. A prosecutor's voice trained for precision, stripped of anything unnecessary. But underneath it, something else. A rhythm I recognized the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in decades, but somehow still know every word to. "Callum," I said. "I want to start with the case," he said. "And then if you're willing, I'd like to talk about something else." "Start with the case," I said. My voice was rough, but it held. The emergency court order was granted at 4:17 this morning, he said. Duty judge reviewed Frank's motion at 3 and signed off within the hour. All trust-related transactions tied to Briggs Materials are frozen as of this moment. Marsh cannot execute a single transfer without immediate contempt of court exposure. A pause. He doesn't know yet. The order was served to his firm's registered address via certified mail and electronic filing. Given the hour it was filed, it's possible he left his house this morning without checking. One press on the mattress. My signal, but Callum couldn't see it. He'll find out Friday, I said. He'll find out Friday, Callum confirmed. And when he does, every document he tries to file becomes evidence of intentional contempt. We want him to try. We need him to try. His voice had a precision to it that reminded me of the way I had felt in my best negotiations, the cool, controlled energy of a man who had already seen the end of the board and was simply waiting for the other side to catch up. The lab results on the soup sample came in 2 hours ago. My chest lurched. And lorazepam, he said. That's a benzodiazepine, a sedative in the same family as Valium commonly prescribed for anxiety. At the concentration found in the sample, it would produce significant sedation and anterograde amnesia, meaning the person taking it would be conscious enough to follow instructions, but would have very limited ability to form or retain new memories for several hours afterward. His voice was measured and clinical, but I heard the controlled fury underneath it. That's what she was putting in your food. Something that would make you sign and not remember signing. The burning that moved through my stomach was so sharp and sudden that I pressed my fist against my mouth to contain whatever sound wanted to come out of it. Lorazepam, in homemade soup. Carried in by a woman who had kissed me on the cheek and called me honey in front of the nursing staff. The second person in the OR, I said when I trusted my voice again. Identified, Callum said. His name is Victor Peck. He's Dr. Harlow Peck's brother-in-law, married to Peck's younger sister for 11 years. He holds a licensed surgical technician certificate, which means he has legal authorization to be present in an operating room when invited by the primary surgeon. A beat. He was not on the OR schedule for your procedure. He entered during the 12-minute gap in the log. We have him on security footage in the building, and we have his financial records showing a deposit of $19,000 into a joint account shared with his wife 3 days before your surgery. Peck paid him, I said. Serena paid Peck, Callum said. Peck paid Victor. The money moved down the chain. He paused. Victor Peck turned himself into our office 2 hours ago. He has a lawyer, and he's cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced charge. The pieces landing one after another, each one clicking into a position I had been holding open for 5 days, produced a physical sensation in my chest that I could not entirely contain. My eyes burned behind the bandages. My hands shook against the mattress. I breathed through it in long, measured intervals and waited until the worst of it passed. Callum. My voice came out lower than I intended. I need to ask you something that has nothing to do with the case. Ask it, he said immediately. Your mother. I stopped. The word mother sat in the air between us, and I let it. Was she? I couldn't find the right shape for the question I actually wanted to ask. Callum was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, she was happy, he said. That's the honest answer. She built a good life. She taught high school English in Denver for 22 years. She had friends she'd known since college and a house with a garden she was genuinely proud of. A pause. She talked about you twice. Once when I was 16 and asked directly. Once when I was 24 and told her I'd done the research. His voice didn't waver, but I heard something in it that had been carried a long time. Both times she said the same thing. She said you were someone who was moving too fast in a direction that didn't have room for what she needed. She didn't say it with anger. She just said it like it was weather. My throat locked entirely. I pressed the back of my hand against my eyes through the gauze and held it there. "I'm sorry," I said. The words came out cracked and insufficient, and I said them anyway because they were true and they were all I had. "I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry she carried that alone." "She didn't carry it alone," Callum said quietly. "She had me." The simplicity of it broke something open in my chest that I had no name for. A 31-year-old man speaking in the measured voice of a prosecutor, telling his father that his mother had not been alone and meaning it as comfort rather than accusation. "Friday," I said when I could speak again. "After Friday, will you come?" "I'll be there before Friday ends," he said. Marin's hand touched my shoulder, gentle, a signal that the security guard's round was approaching. I nodded. "Callum," I kept my voice to barely a breath. "Thank you for being on the right side of this. It's the only side I know how to stand on," he said. My mother made sure of that. The call ended. Marin took the phone. I lay in the dark and felt my own heartbeat unsteady for the first time in 5 days, not from fear, but from something so much larger and more complicated than fear that I didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. Friday was 8 hours away, and I had a son who was going to be there when it was over. I had been counting seconds since the 9 o'clock intercom announcement, not from anxiety, but from the focused attention of a man who had decided every detail of the next hour was a document being written in real time. 3 sets of footsteps. I knew all of them by heart. Serena's heels came first, the pace of a woman approaching a finish line she had been running toward for 14 months. Preston's steps behind her were heavier than usual, off rhythm, the gait of a man who had not slept. And Marsh's footsteps unhurried, certain, the walk of a man who believed he was walking into the completion of something perfectly engineered. None of them knew that a freeze order was sitting in Marsh's firm's email inbox, filed at 4:17 a.m. by Frank Mercer, on behalf of Clifton James Briggs, currently a patient at Mercy Ridge Hospital, and very much in possession of his cognitive faculties. The door opened. "Morning, Clifton." Serena's voice, warm, practiced, aimed as much at the nursing station down the hall as at me. She touched my hand with the careful tenderness of a devoted wife. Her fingers were cool. "We're here, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine." I let my hand lie slack under hers. I kept my breathing slow. Marsh set his briefcase on the table. Latches opened. Papers arranged. 2 documents, he told Serena, running through his checklist, like a man with nowhere to be but here. First, transfers interim management authority over Briggs materials to the holding entity. Second, redirects the primary operating accounts. Once both signatures are on paper, I file before noon. Standard procedure from there. He approached the bed, placed the first document beside my hand, guided my fingers to the signature line. Smooth, efficient, completely devoid of conscience. "Mr. Briggs," the slow, raised voice people use with the elderly and the unwell. "Sign here. This protects your assets during recovery. Your wife has reviewed everything." I picked up the pen, found the line by touch, and I signed. Not quite my real signature. The name was right, the pressure was right, but at the very end of the final S in Briggs, I added a small additional stroke that curved back on itself, barely perceptible. The kind of mark that looked like a tremor in a man with unsteady hands. But Frank Mercer would recognize it in under 1 second, the signal we had agreed on 22 years ago: if you ever sign under duress, sign it like this. A mark that said this signature is not freely given. Contest it immediately. Marsh placed the second document. I signed again. Same controlled tremor, same stroke. Good. The satisfaction in his voice turned my stomach. He collected both documents, slid them into his briefcase with the brisk efficiency of a man with a noon deadline, and Serena touched my hand one final time. Then all 3 of them moved toward the door. The hinge hadn't latched properly since my first night here. Their voices carried back clearly, the voices of people who believed the person behind them was no longer relevant. Marsh. Confirmation of filing by 11. Call me if anything changes. His footsteps moved away. Efficient. Unhurried. Serena and Preston stayed just outside. The Cayman account. Preston's voice had an edge sharp enough to cut. I want the routing number. We've been through this, Serena said. You've been through telling me it doesn't exist. His voice cracked fury barely contained beneath the surface. I covered for you with the hospital staff. I introduced you to this family. You don't get to cut me out. We had an agreement. Stop making noise in a hospital hallway. Serena said, cold and unmoved, and I'll explain everything when this is done. You'll explain it now, Preston said, or I walk in there and wake him up myself. 3 seconds of charged air through an unlatched door. Then Serena's heels clicked away down the hallway. Preston's footsteps followed faster, less steady, the footsteps of a man who had just discovered the ground beneath him was never solid. I pressed one finger slowly into the mattress. Not a signal. Just the quiet gesture of a man marking the exact moment the tide turns. The trap had closed. They just didn't know it yet. The bailiff's hand was still on the door when I heard the wood creak beneath his boots. That sound, heavy, deliberate final, told me the hearing had already begun before anyone spoke a word. Marin had wheeled me in 20 minutes early, my hands folded in my lap, my bandaged eyes aimed straight ahead. I was not supposed to be here. My attending physician had not cleared me for transport. But Frank Mercer had filed the emergency motion at 4:17 a.m., and when the clerk called Clifton Briggs versus Voss Briggs estate action, I told Marin, we're going. She'd gripped the wheelchair handles and said, then we're going. The courtroom smelled like old paper and central air. I counted the footsteps entering 8, maybe 9 people. I recognized 2 sets, Serena's heels sharp as a tack on tile, and Gideon Marsh's slower shuffle, the gait of a man suddenly uncertain of the ground beneath him. Frank leaned close to my left ear. Judge Loretta Wynn. She's sharp. She's already reviewed the freeze motion and the recording. Good, I said, keeping my voice barely above a breath. Let her be sharp. The gavel dropped. We are here. Judge Wynn began, her voice low and precise like a blade kept flat against a whetstone, on an emergency motion filed at 4:17 a.m. by counsel Frank Mercer, on behalf of Clifton Briggs, requesting confirmation of an asset freeze previously granted by this court, and to address allegations of contemptuous filing by respondent's counsel. Marsh's chair scraped. Your Honor, with respect. You'll have your moment, Mr. Marsh. The judge's tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. This court issued a freeze order at 4:12 a.m. Mr. Marsh filed 2 transfer documents at 4:51 a.m. 39 minutes after this court's order was already in the system. A pause so thin it could cut glass. Counsel, do you dispute that timeline? From across the room I heard Marsh swallow. The sound was almost cartoonish. His voice came out strained. Your Honor, I was unaware. You were unaware. Judge Wynn repeated it the way a surgeon repeats a wrong diagnosis. The freeze order was logged in the Harris County digital docket at 4:12 a.m. and electronically served to all parties of record, including your firm's registered email, at 4:14 a.m. You filed at 4:51 a.m. Another pause. Mr. Marsh, I don't have patience for selective awareness in my courtroom. My chest burned. Not from the medical sedation slowly wearing off, not from the bandages pressing my temples, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Relief, raw, scalding, almost unbearable relief. My fingers curled against my thighs, shaking faintly, and I pressed them flat to stop the tremor. Serena spoke up. Her voice was silk pulled over wire. Your Honor, my husband's cognitive state has been assessed by 2 physicians. 2 physicians affiliated with Mercy Ridge Hospital. Frank cut in, and I could hear the quiet force behind his words. which disqualifies them under the affiliation provisions of the Texas Estates Code governing independent capacity assessments. An independent neurologist, Dr. Patricia Owens of St. Luke's, assessed Mr. Briggs at 7 a.m. this morning and confirmed full decisional capacity. Serena's breath hissed. She didn't roar, she never roared in public, but that hiss told me everything. Her composure had a crack in it now, a hairline fracture running straight through. "Your Honor." Callum Reed's voice entered the room from the right side. Young measured, carrying the kind of quiet certainty I hadn't heard since I was 30, and building this company with my own hands. The district attorney's office has subpoenaed financial records from Cayman National Bank account number ending 7741 registered under a shell entity bearing Mrs. Voss Briggs as beneficial owner. Wire transfers to Dr. Harlow Peck totaling $48,000 were processed over the past 6 weeks. The room crackled. I heard one of Serena's attorneys make a low, urgent sound. I heard Marcia's pen drop and hit the floor and not be picked up. Additionally, Callum continued, a recording captured in Mr. Briggs's hospital room on September 16th, made lawfully under Texas Penal Code 16.021 party consent documents, Mrs. Voss Briggs explicitly stating, and I quote, "One more signature and we're done. Marsh handles the rest. The old man won't remember any of it by morning." Serena's voice came out sharp as a whip crack. "That recording is inadmissible. He was incapacitated." "He was awake," Callum said. Just 3 words. Flat, certain, immovable. The independent neurological evaluation and a sworn affidavit from charge nurse Maren Toll both confirm Mr. Briggs displayed consistent indicators of consciousness from September 16th onward. He heard everything. My throat tightened so severely I pressed my fist to my sternum. My eyes burned beneath the bandages, not from the surgery, but from something older. Something that felt like the first morning after a long, brutal storm when you step outside and the air smells new. Judge Wynn's gavel came down once, clean, final. This court confirms the asset freeze on all Briggs Materials accounts and associated trusts effective immediately. Mr. Marsh, you are hereby found in contempt of this court's standing order. Bail is set pending a formal hearing. A beat. Bailiff. I heard Marsh's chair push back hard. I heard his voice rise. This is outrageous. I had no... And then I heard the bailiff's boots cross the floor, and Marsh's voice cut off as sharply as a wire snipped clean. Maren's hand pressed the back of my shoulder. Firm. Steady. "It's working," she said close to my ear. I nodded once. "We're not done yet," I told her, and I meant every word of it. The room was quieter than it had been in 2 weeks. Maren had drawn the privacy curtain halfway, left one lamp burning, the same lamp where the recorder had lived for 5 days, its tiny lens aimed at the door. She'd told me before stepping out, "Someone's coming." He called from the lobby. He asked for you by name. I knew before the door opened. I recognized the walk, the slight drag of the left heel, a habit Preston had carried since he was 12, and broke his ankle falling out of the oak tree behind our Galveston house. He'd never walked quite evenly since. I'd never told him I noticed. The door opened. He stepped inside and stopped. "Dad." His voice sounded wrong, smaller than usual. The arrogance that normally lived in it was gone. What was left sounded raw, young, like a boy standing in a mess he'd made and didn't know how to start cleaning. "Preston," I said. I kept my hands flat on the blanket. He dragged the visitor's chair close and sat down heavily. "You were awake," he said. "The whole time." I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes." "How long?" "Since the morning after surgery," I said. I heard Serena walk in. I heard everything she said. "I heard you, Preston." He made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a breath. Something that came from somewhere he didn't usually let anything come from. "Dad, His voice broke, and he pushed through it. I didn't think it would go this far. Serena said it was just paperwork. She said you'd be taken care of, that the facility would. She said I'd never remember any of it by morning, I said. Those were her exact words. He didn't answer. I heard his palm hit his own knee, open, frustrated, helpless. She showed me reports, assessments, actual documents, Dad. Fabricated documents, I said. Signed by Harlow Peck, who received $48,000 in wire transfers from a shell company Serena controls. Dr. Patricia Owens from St. Luke's confirmed my cognitive function at 7 this morning. The court already has it. Preston exhaled so sharply, it was almost a gasp. Then, and this was the part that split me open, despite myself, he pressed both hands over his face. A dry, wretched sound came out of him, and his shoulders shook once hard, like a man fighting something he'd been holding for a long time. I didn't know, he said, voice muffled behind his hands. About the money. About Peck. I didn't know how deep it went. But you knew something, I said. Not to wound him, just because it was true. He lowered his hands. His breath was unsteady. I knew she wanted control of the accounts. I thought she'd give me my share, and we'd both be done. He stopped. She cut me out, didn't she? The Cayman account, I said. Callum Reed subpoenaed the records this morning. Serena is the sole beneficial owner. Your name was never on it. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard in that room. Not emptiness, but the sound of a man standing at the edge of something, and finally understanding exactly how far down it goes. She was using me, Preston said, his voice stripped down to its frame. Yes, from the beginning. I believe so. He stood up sharply. The chair skidded back. He paced 3 steps left, 3 steps right, like an animal that had just realized the cage was real. Then he stopped. I have a voicemail. From the night before your surgery. Serena laid out both scenarios if the operation failed, if it succeeded. She talked about it like she was planning a catering order. My hands tightened under the blanket, knuckle bones pressing hard against each other. Not from anger, from grief. Because this was my son. And this woman had wrapped herself around him like wire around a young branch until the branch was already bent. You still have it? I asked, on my phone. He came back to the chair, his left heel dragging more than usual. He was shaking. If I give it to Callum Reed, what happens to me? Call Frank Mercer tonight, I said. Before you decide anything, let him speak to your exposure first. And us. His voice cracked. This time he didn't fight it. What happens between us? That question cost him something real. I could hear it in every syllable, the admission that there was still an us that mattered to him after so many years of acting like it didn't. You come to me honest, I said. That's where we start. Not with the money, not with the accounts. You come honest and we start from there. He went quiet. I heard him breathe 3 counts and 3 counts out, and I recognized that rhythm. I had taught it to him when he was 7 years old and terrified of thunderstorms. We used to sit on the porch in Galveston and count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder. He'd forgotten so much. But somewhere underneath everything Serena had layered onto him, that boy was still in there. Okay, he said finally, rough and real. Okay, Dad. Call Frank tonight, I said. Don't wait. He rose and moved toward the door, then stopped. I'm sorry. No fanfare, no performance. Just 2 words aimed at the floor meant for me. I know that's not enough, but I am. I know, I said. The door closed. In the quiet that followed, I pressed one hand flat over my chest, feeling my own heartbeat steady and stubborn and still going, and I thought there is still time. For him. For us. There is still time. But Serena Voss would not have any. I had almost dozed off when the door opened without a knock. That told me everything before a single word was spoken. Marin always knocked twice, 2 soft taps the way a person announces themselves to someone they respect. Frank knocked once firmly. Callum Reed knocked 3 times in quick succession, like a man accustomed to courtroom urgency. The people who loved me knocked. The people who wanted something from me did not. The heels were unmistakable, sharp, deliberate, each step a small declaration of ownership. Serena, I heard her cross the room and stop at the foot of the bed. I kept my breathing slow and measured my bandaged eyes aimed at the ceiling, my hands loose at my sides. I had been playing blind for 2 weeks. I could play it for one more night. Clifton. Her voice was different. The silk was gone. What was left underneath was harder, something close to iron, something that had been waiting a long time to stop being polite. I know you can hear me. The machines show your heart rate just jumped 4 beats. I said nothing. I kept my face neutral. Preston talked to you. It was not a question. Her voice edged upward, not into panic, but into the kind of cold fury that doesn't raise its volume because it doesn't need to. He always was weak, just like his father. That landed. I felt it in my jaw, a slow, involuntary tightening, the kind of pain that starts behind the molars and spreads. I held my breath for half a second and let it out slowly through my nose. Not yet. Not yet. She moved around the side of the bed. I heard her chair scrape, and then the soft sound of leather as she sat down close, the way a person sits when they want you to feel their proximity as a threat. Here is what is going to happen, she said, and her voice dropped to something almost conversational. You are going to call Frank Mercer in the morning. You are going to tell him to withdraw the freeze motion. You are going to tell the court that your cognitive assessment from Dr. Owens was obtained under duress from staff who influenced your responses. She paused for exactly 1 second. Or I will make sure that Callum Reed learns some very interesting things about Briggs Materials' federal contracts between 2009 and 2014. My heart rate climbed. The monitor beside me blipped faster. I could not stop that the body does not lie the way the face can. There it is, Serena said softly, and I heard a smile in it. Not warmth. Satisfaction. The way a chess player sounds when they move the piece that ends the game. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I had a choice in that moment. I could have kept playing helpless. I could have let her walk out thinking she'd drawn blood. Part of me, the 69 years of calculated patience, said, hold. Wait. Let her believe she's winning. But there was another part of me. The part that had built something from $40,000 and a rented office in 1987. The part that had watched my mother work herself to the bone so I could have a start. The part that had sat in this hospital bed for 2 weeks, listening to this woman measure my life in dollar amounts and signature lines. That part of me was done holding. The 2009 contracts, I said. The room changed. I felt it the way a room changes when the balance of power shifts, when the person who thought they were holding the cards realizes the table has been turned over entirely. Serena went very still. I heard her breath catch. The contracts were audited in 2011. I continued, keeping my voice level, unhurried, the voice of a man who has nothing left to be afraid of. Clean audit. All federal compliance documentation is on file with the GSA office in Austin. Frank Mercer has the full records. He has had them for 12 years. I turned my head toward her, a deliberate movement, slow, aimed directly at where I knew she was sitting. Whatever you think you know about those contracts, you are wrong. And if you file a false report with a federal prosecutor, Serena, that is a felony. She made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a word. Something that came from the chest and did not make it all the way out. You've been awake, she said. Her voice had thinned down to almost nothing. You've been awake this whole time, since the morning after surgery, I said. I heard you walk in. I heard you say, finally. I heard everything, every conversation, every phone call, every plan you and Marsh and Peck assembled in this room while you thought I was unconscious. I paused to let that settle into her bones. I let you talk. She stood up. The chair scraped back so hard it hit the wall. I heard her breathing shallow, rapid, the sound of a person recalculating at full speed and finding that none of the numbers are working anymore. "The voicemail," she said. Preston gave them the voicemail. "Callum Reed has it." I confirmed. He also has the wire transfer records, the OR log, and a sworn affidavit from Victor Peck, who accepted a plea agreement this morning. I settled my hands flat on the blanket. "It's done, Serena. All of it. It has been done since 4 o'clock this morning. You can't—" Her voice cracked. Just once. A hairline fracture running straight through the composure she had worn like armor for 3 years. "You can't prove intent. You can't prove The recording from this room," I said quietly, "has you stating verbatim that you had 2 plans in place, one if my surgery failed, one if it succeeded. Both plans ended with me in a care facility and your name on my accounts." I took a slow breath. "Serena, go home. Call an attorney. Not Marsh. Marsh is in contempt and he has his own problems tonight. Call someone who can actually help you." She did not respond. I heard her heels turn on the floor. I heard her take 3 steps toward the door, then stop. "I loved him, you know." Her voice was barely audible. "Your father, Briggs Materials, what it stood for. I loved what it could have been." The grief in those words was real. I was almost certain of it. And that was the cruelest part of all, not that she felt nothing, but that she felt just enough to make the damage worse. "Then you should have let it be what it was," I said. The door opened. The door closed. I pressed my fist against my sternum and held it there, feeling my own heartbeat pound against my knuckles, fast, indignant, alive. My eyes burned beneath the bandages, not from the surgery, from something that had no clean name, not grief, not victory, something in between where the 2 things live together and neither one wins. Maren came in 4 minutes later. I knew her knock. "She's gone," Maren said. "I know," I said. "Call Callum. Tell him she's on her way out of the building." I heard Maren reach for her phone before I finished the sentence. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark that had been my whole world for 2 weeks, listening to the hospital breathe around me. The distant hum of the elevator, the soft rubber squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum, the occasional percussion of a cart being rolled past my door. I had trained myself to read that building like a language. And in those hours between Serena's departure and the first gray light of Saturday morning, I read it carefully, counting the minutes the way I had once counted dollars. At 5:31 a.m., Frank Mercer called my room phone. "It happened," he said. No preamble. Frank had never been a man who wasted words on ceremony. I gripped the receiver. My knuckles ached. "When?" 11:47 last night. Callum had the warrant ready before she reached the parking garage. Frank's voice carried something I had not heard in it for years, a barely contained energy, the sound of a man watching 30 years of careful work arrive at exactly the right destination. She was taken into custody at the corner of Holcomb and Fannin. Her personal attorney, not Marsh, someone new, she called on the way out, arrived at the booking station at 1:15, and has already filed for bail. "Will she get it?" "Not before Monday's hearing," Frank said. Callum opposed release on flight risk grounds. She has a property in the Cayman Islands. The judge agreed. I exhaled. The breath came out ragged at the edges, longer than I'd intended, carrying something with it that had been sitting in my chest since the morning I woke up in this room and heard Serena's voice say finally. My throat pulled tight. My eyes stung under the bandages, and I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose, hard, holding back whatever was trying to get out. "Harlow Peck," I asked when I could trust my voice again, "accepted the plea at 9 a.m. yesterday. 37 months surrender of medical license, full cooperation. He gave Callum the name of the anesthesiologist who created the OR log gap, a contract staff member named Broderick Hale, no hospital affiliation. Hale was brought in specifically for the surgery and has not been seen at Mercy Ridge since. Frank paused. Callum has a warrant for Hale. It's a matter of time. And Marsh? Contempt hearing is Monday at 2. His firm has already moved to distance itself. They issued a statement this morning saying Marsh acted without firm authorization. A dry sound from Frank. Not quite a laugh, something more tired and satisfied than that. 31 years I've watched Gideon Marsh operate in this city. He's been cutting ethical corners since before Preston was born. It was always going to catch up with him. I nodded, even though Frank couldn't see it. My hand was trembling against the receiver, not from fear, not from cold. From the accumulated weight of 2 weeks of held breath finally being allowed to leave my body. The door opened. 2 knocks, first Marin's knock. I need to step away for 1 moment, I told Frank. Hold on. Marin came to the bedside. Her hand found my forearm, not clinical, not procedural. The kind of touch that means I know and I'm here. Callum Reed is downstairs, she said quietly. He wants to come up when you're ready. He said there's no rush. He'll wait as long as you need. Something moved through me at that, a warmth that started at my sternum and radiated outward the way heat moves through old stone after a long, cold night. Callum Reed, my son. Standing in a lobby at 5:30 in the morning because he had spent the entire night making sure the case held, making sure the warrant was airtight, making sure I was safe. And now he was waiting because he understood that some things could not be rushed. Tell him 10 minutes, I said. Tell him I need 10 minutes. Marin squeezed my arm once and left. I put the phone back to my ear. Frank? The trust provisions mother's estate. What's the current status? Irene's trust was insulated from the moment the freeze went into effect, Frank said. The shell company Serena used to funnel money to Peck was never successfully linked to any Briggs Materials account she tried, but the firewall your mother's estate attorney built in the final years of her life held. Every cent of the trust is intact. A pause. Clifton, your mother built that thing like a fortress. Nothing got through. My throat locked completely. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose, 1 slow count, 2, 3. My mother, Irene Briggs, who had worked 40 years in a textile plant in Beaumont and saved every dollar she could spare so that one day her son might have a foundation that couldn't be taken. She had been gone 6 years. She would never see this morning. She would never know that her fortress had held, but it held. It held because she had built it right, and because Frank Mercer had maintained it faithfully, and because Marin Toll had noticed a hand move in a hospital bed when no one else was looking. It held because of the people who do the right thing quietly, without applause, without cameras. The people who simply do not stop. Thank you, Frank, I said. My voice broke on the second word, and I didn't try to fix it. For all of it. For 30 years of it. Don't get sentimental on me, Frank said gruffly, but I could hear his voice thicken at the edges. I've got a contempt hearing to prepare for. Get some rest. He hung up. 10 minutes later, Callum Reed knocked on my door. 3 times quick, the knock of a man accustomed to urgency. I had learned that knock. I had come to love it. Come in, I said. He entered. I heard him stop a few feet from the bed, and for a moment neither of us moved. I could hear him breathing steadier than Preston's had been steadier than Serena's, carrying the kind of quiet that belongs to a person who has made their decisions and does not regret them. It's done, I asked. She's in custody, he said. Peck is cooperating. The warrant for Hale goes active at 6 a.m. He came closer. His footsteps were unhurried. He sat in the visitor's chair and leaned forward, elbows on knees, the way I had once sat when I was young and had something important to say to someone I respected. How are you feeling? I considered the question honestly. My eyes burned. My chest ached. My hands resting on the blanket were still trembling faintly at the fingertips. I was 69 years old, and I had spent 2 weeks in a hospital bed pretending to be broken so that the people who wanted me broken would show me exactly who they were. Tired, I said. Grateful, and very tired. Callum made a sound, warm, quiet something between a laugh and a breath. That sounds about right. Stay a while, I said. If you have time, there's no rush. He settled back in the chair. I've got time, he said. And in that small plain room, as the first gray light of Saturday morning pressed against the window blinds, I was not alone. Frank called me from the courthouse steps at 14 minutes past 2. I had been sitting up in bed for the first time in 2 weeks. Dr. Patricia Owens had cleared me for limited mobility that morning, and Marin had stacked 2 pillows behind my back so I could hold a position that felt for the first time since September like a man and not a patient. I was still bandaged. I was still blind, technically, in the legal sense of what the doctors had told Serena. But the bandages were coming off Wednesday. And everything else was already coming off today. Marsh, Frank said without greeting. 60 days criminal contempt. Suspended license pending state bar disciplinary review. He'll be disbarred before Thanksgiving. My hand tightened on the phone. I exhaled slowly, deliberately through my teeth. 31 years I had watched Gideon Marsh operate in this city. Watched him bend rules with the casual confidence of a man who believed the rules existed for other people. 60 days and a suspended license was not poetic justice. But it was a beginning. And the bar review, I asked. Callum submitted the full contempt record, plus 3 prior complaints that were quietly buried in 2017 and 2019. The bar will not bury them this time. Frank's voice carried that dry, restrained energy again, the sound of a man watching a very long game reach its final move. It's done, Clifton. Marsh is done. I nodded. My throat felt thick. Thank you, Frank. Don't thank me yet, he said. There's something else. Callum asked me to be the one to tell you. He thought it should come from me. The room felt different suddenly. The way a room feels before a storm, a subtle change in pressure, barely perceptible but undeniable. My spine straightened. My hands resting on the blanket went very still. Tell me, I said. Frank took a breath. When Callum subpoenaed Serena's financial records, the forensic accountant found a secondary account she had not disclosed. A trust account. The beneficiary listed was Marin Toll. A pause waited and deliberate. Clifton, the account was opened in 2019. The funding source was traced back to a private settlement paid out by Briggs Materials in 1994. A settlement involving a woman named Lorraine Toll of Galveston. Everything in me went very quiet. Lorraine Toll, Galveston, 1994. I was 37 years old in 1994. Briggs Materials had just landed its first federal contract. I was working 18-hour days, traveling 4 days out of 7, and I had not been a good man in every way. Not then. Not in all the ways that mattered. Lorraine Toll had been a project coordinator in our Galveston office. We had known each other for 8 months. The settlement arranged privately by Frank's predecessor at the firm was sealed. I had signed the documents. I had sent the check. And I had told myself in the way that men tell themselves things when they do not want to carry the weight of them that I had handled it. Marin, I said. My voice came out barely above a breath. The DNA report was commissioned by Serena 18 months ago, Frank said carefully. She discovered the connection while investigating your financial history, looking for leverage. She used the trust account set up for Marin, as a tool to recruit Marin to her side. She told Marin she would expose the sealed settlement and challenge her legitimacy as your heir unless Marin cooperated. Frank paused. Marin refused, and then she started helping you instead. My chest cracked open. There is no other way to describe it, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. Something inside me fractured along a line I had not known existed, and through that fracture came something enormous and grief-stricken and bewildered and ashamed all at once, pressing outward against my ribs until I had to press my fist against my sternum just to hold myself together. The door opened. 2 knocks first. Her knocks. Marin came to the bedside. I heard her set something on the tray table, the light sound of a paper envelope. She pulled the chair close and sat down. "Frank told you," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." My voice was wrecked. I didn't try to fix it. "Marin, how long have you known?" "Since I was 26, she said. "My mother told me before she died. She said you were a man who made a mistake and then made it disappear. She said she didn't want me to look for you. She said you weren't worth my time." A pause. Her voice stayed even, but I could hear the effort in it, the careful, deliberate control of someone who has rehearsed this conversation many times alone. "I became a nurse because she got sick, and I needed to understand medicine. I ended up at Mercy Ridge because of a job posting. I did not know you were a patient here until the morning your surgery was listed on the board." Her breath shifted. "And then I saw your name and I thought I would just do my job. I would take care of you the same as anyone else. I would not say anything." "But you did more than your job," I said. "Yes." Her voice cracked then just once, a clean break like a branch under weight. "Because whatever you did in 1994, you did not deserve what Serena was doing to you. No one deserves that. And maybe—" She stopped, breathed, started again. "Maybe I wanted to know if there was something worth knowing about you." My eyes were burning so badly beneath the bandages that I had to tilt my head back, pressing it against the pillow, blinking hard against tears that had nowhere to go. "I'm sorry," I said. The 2 words were wholly inadequate. I knew it. I said them anyway because they were true, and because some things need to be said even when they cannot possibly be enough. For 1994, for all of it, I am sorry. Marin's hand covered mine on the blanket. "I know," she said. Her voice was soft, unsteady, and real. "I know." On the tray table, the envelope sat unopened. The DNA report. The proof of something that Blood had always known even when we had not. I did not need to open it. The bandages came off on a Wednesday. I did not cry when the light came back. I had expected to. I had imagined it many times in the dark, the moment when the gray nothingness behind the gauze would give way to color and shape, and the ordinary miracle of a world you can see. I had imagined relief euphoria, maybe something close to joy. What I felt instead was simpler and heavier than any of that. I felt old. I felt the particular bone-deep tiredness of a man who has carried something enormous for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Dr. Owens said my vision would stabilize over the next 6 to 8 weeks. For now, the edges of everything were soft, as though the world were being broken in gently. The first face I saw clearly was Marin's. She was standing at the foot of the bed, arms crossed loosely, watching me with an expression I could not fully read, something cautious and hopeful, and guarded all at once, the face of someone who is not yet sure they are allowed to want what they are beginning to want. When my eyes found hers and held, she smiled. It was small and unsteady and absolutely real, and it hit me somewhere behind the sternum like a quiet fist. "Hello," I said. "Hello," she said back. That was enough. 3 months after that, on a gray December morning that smelled like rain and cold asphalt, and the particular sharpness of Houston winter, I sat in courtroom 7 of the Harris County Courthouse and listened to Judge Evelyn Holt read Serena Voss's sentence into the record. Frank sat to my left. Callum Reed sat 2 rows ahead with his team. Preston sat beside me, close enough that his shoulder pressed against mine, the way he had not sat next to me since he was a boy, and was afraid of something bigger than himself. On the charge of elder financial abuse under Texas Penal Code Section 32.53. Judge Holt said, her voice flat and exact as a surveyor's line. The defendant is sentenced to 9 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice with eligibility for parole review after 6 years served. Serena stood straight. I will say that for her, she stood straight. Her attorney's hand went briefly to her arm, and she shrugged it off. She was 40 years old, and she had built something calculated and cold and ultimately hollow, and now it was over, and she stood straight through the end of it. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, the judge continued, 4 years concurrent. On the charge of obstruction of medical care, 3 years concurrent. A pause. Mr. Mercer, are there additional matters for the record? Frank rose. His voice was steady and clean. Your Honor, we request formal notation that Gideon Marsh has surrendered his law license as of November 14th, and that Dr. Harlow Peck's plea agreement, including 37 months and full medical license surrender, was accepted October 2nd. Both are on record. So noted. The gavel fell. Preston's hand found my arm. His grip was tight, too tight, the grip of someone holding on, because letting go feels dangerous. I covered his hand with mine and held it there. It's done, I said quietly. He nodded. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle working at his temple. His eyes were wet, and he was fighting it the way the Briggs men always fight things, stubbornly, quietly, losing ground one blink at a time. I keep thinking, he said, his voice rough and low, about how different it could have gone. If Marin hadn't noticed. If Frank hadn't filed in time. If you... He stopped. Started again. If you hadn't been strong enough to hold on. I wasn't alone, I said. That's the whole point, Preston. I was never alone. He pressed his lips together. One tear made it through his defenses, just one tracking fast down the side of his face before he caught it with the back of his hand and pressed forward. Jaw tight, shoulders squared. He looked for a moment startlingly like the boy I had almost lost to indifference and distance and too many years of not paying attention. I squeezed his hand once hard. Come work with me, I said. Not as my heir, not as a title or a share percentage, as a person who shows up every day and learns something. I looked at him directly, something I could do now, with my eyes, with my returned sight, a gift I would not waste. Start over, with me. His face crumpled. He pressed his free hand over his mouth and breathed hard through his nose, fighting the grief and relief that were trying to come out together. His shoulders shook once, a single involuntary tremor, and then he steadied himself and looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and a jaw that had stopped shaking just enough to speak. Yeah, he said. Yeah, Dad. Okay. Outside the courthouse, the December air was sharp and clean and smelled of rain. Marin was waiting on the steps. She had not come inside, had said the courtroom belonged to us, to the family. She was wearing a dark coat, her hands in her pockets, watching the street, with the composed patience of someone who has learned that the things worth waiting for are worth waiting for. She turned when she heard the door. Our eyes met. Frank said something to Preston behind me, something about paperwork, something practical, something that could wait. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, the railing cool under my palm, the world still softly edged with the new gift of restored sight. How did it go? Marin asked. 9 years, I said. She nodded once. Her expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter, the face of a person who understands that justice is not a celebration, it is a correction, a restoration of something that should never have been disturbed. And you, she said, how are you? I looked at her, this woman who had noticed a hand move in a hospital bed when no one else was looking, who had refused to be weaponized, who had chosen to be decent in the dark, where no one would have blamed her for choosing otherwise. My chest filled with something warm and aching and enormous. Better, I said. Getting there. She smiled the same small, unsteady, entirely real smile from that Wednesday morning in the hospital room. "Good," she said. "That's enough for now." We walked down the steps together into the gray December morning, and behind us the courthouse door swung closed, and ahead of us the city stretched outward full of ordinary light. "I have told you everything now. Every room, every whispered word, every signature, every fracture. And sitting here on the other side of it all, I find myself thinking about something my mother Irene used to say when I was young and foolish and certain I could outrun my own mistakes. God doesn't forget what you bury, son. He just waits until you're ready to dig it up yourself." She was right. He always is. Here is what I learned. What I wish I had learned 30 years earlier before the damage was done. The people you dismiss, the ones you settle with, and move on from the ones you tell yourself are handled. They do not disappear. They become the hand that saves you or the wound that finally surfaces, or both at once. Don't be like I was. Don't let ambition make you careless with people. Don't assume that because something is legally resolved, it is humanly resolved. The law settles accounts. Only honesty settles the rest. My personal belief, for whatever it is worth, from an old man who learned most things too late, is this: betrayal always carries the seeds of its own exposure. You do not need to chase it. You only need to stay awake long enough to see it. This has been one of my grandpa's stories, imperfect, costly, and entirely true in the ways that matter. Every Grandpa Stories channel exists because someone somewhere lived through something worth passing down. If this Grandpa Stories reminded you of your own family, your own close calls, your own quiet heroes, then it was worth every word. This is a family story that I never planned to tell. But the best family story is never the one you planned. It is the one that finds you. And sometimes the most important family story you will ever hear is the one that holds up a mirror. If something here stayed with you, drop a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not yet subscribed, and stay close, there are more stories coming, and some of them will surprise you. Thank you truly and deeply for staying until the very end. One small word before we continue the stories ahead contains some fictional elements built with care and with purpose to teach, to reflect, to resonate. If that is not what you came for today, there is no judgment in stepping away and choosing something that fits you better. But if you are staying, I am glad. Let's go a little further together.